is time for that segment of the program in which we recap the events of the last week. That segment, which we call Breaking the News. Joining us, as always, is executive producer Bradley Herring. Brad, what went on this week?
First of all, I wanted to let people know we're recording a little bit earlier than we ordinarily do. So we're recording on a Wednesday. So if anything crazy happened Thursday or Friday, we're not going to talk about it. But following up on a story we've been discussing for weeks, Flint, Michigan, where conservative austerity policies have led to a nightmare of lead-poisoned water, seeing officials from the city grilled in Congress. This morning, Wednesday, hearings were held by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, chaired by Republican Jason Chaffetz, with several key figures in the Flint disaster subpoenaed to appear. Shockingly missing, Governor Rick Snyder was not even offered a chance to come and talk.
Was he not offered a chance, or did he decline?
He was not offered.
That's
what he says.
So they're protecting him.
Oh, of course.
Well, presumably they are protecting him. However, they did bring in emergency manager Ed Kurtz. Now, Ed Kurtz was appointed under Michigan's law, which allows the elected leadership of cities to be sort of dictatorially removed if there's a financial emergency, not a humanitarian emergency, a financial emergency. And fortunately, we did have a couple Democrats at that. I was just taking a look at it. We did have a couple Democrats do a little truth-telling. Ranking member Elijah Cummings, a Democrat of Maryland. I read a letter from former Flint County City Councilman Sheldon Neely placing the blame where it belongs, which is on Kurtz, which will you remember? Well, okay, that I don't want to digress too much. And U.S. Representative Gerald Connolly, a Democrat of Virginia, cited the failures of the emergency managers, calling it, and this is right on, quote, the consequence of putting ideology, and I would add in this case the ideology of corporate everything, privatization, anti-government, ahead of human beings and their needs and welfare. Amen.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, the other big story of the week, the Iowa caucuses were held this week on Monday, and we're going to start off on the Democratic side. The big news is it was basically a tie. Both sides are claiming some sort of victory. Hillary Clinton technically edged out based on a couple of coin flips, actually, and both sides have something of a point to having won. But the reality to me is that at least very little has really changed in the race with this result.
Well, I'll tell you what I think has changed. And again, I'm, as I always say, biased because I'm on Team Bernie. Well, I work for Bernie. But I think that if you look at where he was in the Iowa polls just a few weeks ago, it was something like a 12-point gap. I think certainly he had tremendous momentum in this race. And then the polls in recent weeks had them kind of jockeying back and forth, but pretty much predicted about a 3-point win for her was the last number I saw. So the fact is it was very, very, very close, and that's a really big deal, I think. And now on to New Hampshire.
Yeah, my thinking is that it just continues the trend line we've already seen of Sanders creeping up. Compared to the Republican side, there wasn't any huge, dynamic shift in the race, which we'll get into in a minute. But there was one big change on the Democratic side. Now there are only two. Former Baltimore Mayor Martin O'Malley ended his quixotic bid for Congress after gathering zero support or momentum.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think O'Malley took great, strong, progressive positions, but he just never connected with voters. And I think Bernie took that oxygen. I think it's as simple as that. Yeah,
he seemed to be waiting around for something to happen to Clinton, for, I don't know, the Benghazi hearings to somehow damage her or something, but nothing really came of it, and he got no oxygen in the race. And now for the other side. It turns out that the candidate who based his entire campaign around being a winner is the season's first real loser. Donald Trump limped to a fairly distant second in Iowa behind Ted Cruz, and he did not take it very well. He took 15 hours off from his Twitter page and I guess got a good long cry in, a good long night's sleep, and then went crazy on Twitter. Check out some of his explanations. He's right now accusing Ted Cruz of having stolen the Iowa caucus. He first said illegally. He tweeted, Ted Cruz didn't win Iowa. He illegally stole it. That is why all of the polls were so wrong. N-E-Y, I guess he mean and why. He got more votes than anticipated. Bad. But he deleted that tweet and then replaced it one where he didn't say illegally. He also went on a just a long tear, which I'm not going to get into everything about it, saying that Cruz put out a release that Ben Carson was quitting the race and then stealing all those votes. He also said that...
Which, to be fair, he did kind of lie about that, Cruz.
Sure.
On the other hand, if we were going to invalidate the results of any election where a politician lied, we'd have to go back about 200 years.
Yeah. Cruz's campaign also mentioned Trump's support of Obamacare, and now Trump wants to nullify those election results or just give him the win.
Well,
because Cruz lied.
Trump's whole thing is losers are losers, and there's nobody likes a loser, and his utter contempt for losers, and it must hurt when the only thing you can hear in your ears is "next train for Loserville, now departing track 3," which is pretty. And as I would say once again, the new Donald Trump campaign theme song is "Blame Canada."
And I don't see how he recovers from this being a loser and being a coward running away from the debate. It just shows nothing but weakness.
Well, loser, coward, temper tantrum thrower. I would say his brand has been incredibly tarnished. I will give you a nod because you said it hurt him to not show up at the debate. I said I didn't think it did. It probably did. Certainly his behavior, something hurt him. And
he said at a rally it did, but he also said a lot of crazy things.
Right. I think given the way he's campaigned, he's damaged goods now, and I don't think he's got the kind of persona that survives long-term being damaged goods. I think now he's selling his brand. I'm not even sure he's actually a candidate for president anymore.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Rubio catches up and overtakes him in New Hampshire, which we will be there for. We're going to be broadcasting from New Hampshire. And our next episode will have a lot of those interviews. You can also listen 1 to 4 p.m. on We Act Radio in Washington, D.C. for our live coverage from New Hampshire. So Ted Cruz was ostensibly the winner in Iowa, but he joins 2012 winner Rick Santorum and 2008 winner Mike Huckabee. Do we think that's a trend? Does it actually matter for Ted Cruz that he won in the caucus, or is that simply a result of the large evangelical vote in Iowa?
Well, I thought those were rhetorical questions.
No, I want your thoughts on it. Do we think this helps him?
Sure, it helps him. I think it does, but I think there's no question it elevates him and gives him visibility. I keep coming back to with Ted Cruz that he is just such. By the way, again, I'm not an Andy Borowitz fan, but particularly, but when he said, Ted Cruz victory gives hope to unlikable people everywhere or something like that, I think he's just so fundamentally dislikable that I think he's so deeply disliked by his own Republican colleagues that I think that while this strengthens him, it also kind of puts a bullseye on him for other Republicans who will work very hard, hyena style, to form a pack and take him down before they move on. So it could be, it's all about how the press reacts to it and public perception reacts, but I think it does put Rubio in a stronger position to be the anti-Cruz.
Yeah, and it's important you mentioned that how press reacts and how public, the public perception is, because the winner in all this is actually the guy who came in third, it seems, Marco Rubio. He's the guy that everybody's pushing forward as having the momentum coming out of Iowa. His campaign now gets to claim that momentum, and he seems to have taken up residence in that sweet spot right behind Cruz, whom everybody hates, and Trump, who everybody knows can't actually win. So I would think that the more mainstream people would start to get behind him as the compromise candidate. And that's why we're seeing Kasich, we're seeing Christie, we're seeing all these guys, even Jeb, to the extent that he has anything left, targeting Rubio rather than the other two guys who are in first and second.
And by the way, I don't find him that lovable either, but
No.
And so here we are.
Yeah. One more thing I want to get to before we talk more about Iowa, which we will. But it's important. What's going to please a lot of people and is without doubt far too late in his presidency. Barack Obama today visited a mosque in the United States. You wouldn't think that would be too big of a deal, but it's the first time of his presidency that he has. He visited the Islamic Society of Baltimore, seeking to rebut a rise in anti-Muslim bigotry, which has become a major feature of the presidential campaign on the right, featuring a rise in attacks on Muslims and calls to ban all Muslims from the United States. He said, quote, "Muslim Americans keep us safe. They are our police. They are our firefighters. They're in Homeland Security. We've seen an alarming willingness on the part of some Republicans to try to marginalize law-abiding, patriotic Muslim Americans. It's just offensive. Oh, I'm sorry, this is Josh Earnest. It's just offensive to a lot of Americans who recognize that those kinds of cynical political tactics run directly contrary to the values that we hold dear in this country.
He's right, and they also work great with a certain segment of the white electorate. Look, I'm really glad that the president's doing this. George Bush, to his credit, did this right away in 2001 after 9/11 and was very strong about it. I think probably Obama felt, since an absurd percentage of this country in the Republican conservative base thinks he's a Muslim because of all the secret Kenyan Muslim, not born here, all that stuff, that I think he felt that for political reasons, he could not say anything about it. I think he should have. I think it would have been an act of courage. But I understand the calculation. I think he probably feels he's not going to ever run for anything again. He's not going to, he's not going to try to elect another Congress in his term. It's time for him to set the record straight. And I do have the sense that as a human being, he's offended by it. So as we all decent people are. So I'm delighted that he's doing it, and I hope it gets a lot of play.
Yeah. And just this weekend, depending on when you're listening to it, it may have already happened, but this weekend is that grand bacchanal of advertising and chips and beer that we know as the Super Bowl. And some news broke this morning that I'm sure the NFL didn't want on the eve of the game. Ken Stabler, former NFL MVP and Super Bowl winner, he died back in July, and he requested that his brain be studied after his death, in part to explain why his mind had been slipping so badly in his final years. The result came back this week and found that he had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which is a degenerative condition in the brain believed to be caused by repetitive subconcussive head trauma, the kind that happens on virtually every play in the game of football.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because it is a sport that is just brutally damaging its players, and I think that should be on it. Tragically, I mean, I hate to spoil a good game. I'm not sure how much in this case we're talking about a good game, but
at least Ben Roethlisberger's not in it.
Right. But I hate to spoil people's fun, but I think people do need to know the human price that's being paid. I also have to say, I don't even know who the halftime act is this year. Do you?
No, I don't.
They ran
Coldplay.
Oh God,
Yeah.
they ran a poor Coldplay. By the way, I have a monologue. I don't know if I get to do it about Coldplay and their cultural appropriation.
Oh yeah.
But in their new video, but I have to say they ran out of superstar. It used to be a superstar act did the halftime show, whether it was Jay-Z or Bruce Springsteen.
Coldplay is.
I guess they are. They're not. You're not talking about Elton John or Paul McCartney or. I mean, these are people who have gigantic status.
Springsteen when he crotch dove into the camera.
Yeah, Springsteen, Jay-Z. But all right, okay, whatever. I mean, Coldplay, one album. I give them one album.
Okay, all right.
That's just me. Okay, all right.
I don't think they're great, but they're huge.
I guess they are. All
right, let's get back to some Republicans real quick. Just like on the Democratic side, there's a little bit of bad news, a little sad news this week, I guess. Mike Huckabee ended his presidential bid after pulling in 1.8% of the vote and gaining 0 delegates. And just today, we found out, today being Wednesday, that poor Rand Paul is also dropping out as well. So pour one out for our homies there.
Rand Paul, libertarian, the voter market just wasn't buying what he was selling. No. The market knows best.
The free hand smote his campaign.
That's right. The invisible hand just slapped him.
All right. And one more fun one before we wrap up for the week. Jeb's campaign seems to be on a roller coaster of laughs these days, with awkwardness piled on top of gaffes. It's gotten so bad that Linda, our associate producer, told me that she thinks it's actually an indication that he doesn't actually want to be president and is sort of sabotaging himself. A flyer was making the rounds in Iowa, which seemed to indicate that the Bush campaign was paying $25 apiece for seat fillers at his final Iowa rally. 2 of these supposed seat fillers then interrupted the rally, claiming that they had not yet been paid. The campaign claimed it was a dirty trick by a competing campaign, but based on his poor showing, it's hard to rule that out completely. In fact, based on how much Bush spent in Iowa, he paid about $2,800 for each vote he got. No one else even reached $1,000.
Well, first of all, I congratulate you for doing the appropriate thing, which is when you say the word Jeb, you have to say it to put the exclamation point on the end.
That's how it's spelled.
So, Jeb.
Yeah.
Oh boy! Look, the $2,800. It's simple. It's simple division, right? It's simple arithmetic. It's not just how much he spent. It's how few votes he got for how much he spent. So, I mean, look, the writing is on the wall, exclamation point and all, for Jeb, that he ain't going to be president of the United States. I'm pretty confident saying that at this point. So it's interesting that Linda says she doesn't think he even wants it. But whether he wants it or not, he ain't getting it. And it might be the dignified, except he got all that money from people. He got $103 million. What's he supposed to do with that? I guess it's embarrassing. I don't know.
Yeah, and he gave something of a stem winder, just riled up speech today in New Hampshire. And he literally said, "Applaud, please," to the crowd at the end of it.
Well, that must have been a stem winder. Maybe he could actually burn the cash. I think that would be awesome, to just quit the race and burn the cash. Of course, it would be better to give it to the poor, but he wouldn't be a Republican if he thought like that.
Well,
so,
how about instead of seat fillers, he just gives people $25 for a vote? That seems a much better way to spend it.
Or gives them seats to something they want to see.
Like Coldplay.
All right, you'd have to pay me more than that.